Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And I freely admit that much of that world was shaped by my love of superhero movies. And I was lucky enough to come of age just as superhero movies became a true force at the box office. But within that same time, I've seen superhero movies manifest in many forms. Some were truly amazing and groundbreaking. Others, not so much. But a big part of what makes these movies work is timing. When The Dark Knight came out in 2008, I feel like its timing was perfect. It just struck all the right notes from a cinematic, narrative, and cultural perspective. It truly captured the essence of Batman and the Joker perfectly, and it did so in a way that resonated with audiences during a particular phase of superhero movie evolution. On top of that, Heath Ledger's performance as Joker went down as one of the greatest displays of acting prowess of all time, and not just for a superhero movie. For many fans, myself included, Heath Ledger's version of the Joker will always be the one by which all others are measured. By contrast, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker couldn't have been timed worse. After the release of Suicide Squad and the less than stellar reception of Jared Leto's Joker, that movie had a lot working against it. On top of that, the social, political, and cultural landscape in 2019 was very sensitive to every theme that Joker explored. For so many reasons, this movie should not have succeeded. But it did. And it succeeded more than anyone could have imagined. It didn't just make $1 billion at the box office, despite having no continuity ties with any other Batman movie. It ended up garnering over a dozen Oscar nominations, one of which yielded Joaquin Phoenix an award for Best Actor. As a fan of superhero comics and superhero media, I think Joker is one of the best single movies to come out of this genre. It dared to do something different and bolder with this iconic character. It also took huge risks telling this story and conveying a particular message. Yet somehow, it all worked beautifully. But another aspect about this movie that stood out wasn't just the box office or the awards. It was the numerous controversies that followed this movie even before it came out. And it's here where I'll have to scrutinize the timing of the movie once more. Because even though 2019 wasn't that long ago, Joker came out at a time when taboos about mental health and disturbed lonely men were really hot-button topics. Granted, they still are in many respects, but the profile of those issues was a lot higher that year. When this movie came out, news about mass shootings perpetrated by disturbed lonely men were still fresh in everyone's memory. Some of those men even had disturbing manifestos that stoked even more fears about future shootings. These were truly scary issues, and yet the story in Joker neither avoids nor downplays those issues. But to truly make it work, this movie had to do something that few Joker stories have been able to achieve, which is give the Joker a backstory. Now that in and of itself is risky, because for many lifelong comic fans, especially Batman fans, the very notion of fleshing out this character undermines the core of his appeal. The Joker has always functioned better as a chaotic force of nature rather than a person with a tangible history. Because ever since his creation in 1940, the details of Joker's life have been vague for the most part. He has often been defined as a perfect counter to Batman's never-ending crusade against crime. Whereas Batman seeks justice through clear, defined rules, the Joker seeks total chaos and laughs at the very notion of such rules. As a result, the Joker can never be too defined as a character if he is to personify that chaos. But despite these challenges, the movie found a way to tell his story, and much like The Dark Knight before it, it somehow manages to make the Joker even more terrifying as a villain. And it does so in a way that doesn't hide from the distressing implications about mentally troubled people in the real world. Through the character of Arthur Fleck, we see a disturbed mind trapped in an environment that seemed to do everything to make his condition worse. Through both unavoidable circumstances and fateful choices, we see this man with a frail psyche become something far more dangerous. It doesn't happen all at once, There's no single trigger like falling into a vat of chemicals or seeing a loved one murdered. There's a more cumulative effect to Arthur Fleck's transformation into the Joker. It's not always logical or smooth. The only real constant is that Fleck gets more twisted and unhinged with each escalating event. And unlike traditional heroes or villains, he really does lean into it. This is also where Joaquin Phoenix's performance really shines. He carries himself with a presence that feels very close to what Heath Ledger captured in The Dark Knight. When the movie begins, Fleck is simply a mentally ill man and he's struggling to deal with it. But what he does with his illness and what it does to him ends up turning Fleck into something much more than another disturbed loner. And from this critical detail, a lot of controversy behind the Joker took hold. While I would argue that much of that controversy was misguided, I also feel it's somewhat understandable. But because of the politics of the time, understandable concerns eventually morphed into irrational panics. It actually got to a point where some claimed that this movie celebrated or glorified incel culture through Arthur Fleck's story. And somehow, celebrating this movie would embolden those kinds of toxic subcultures. It may seem crazy now, but when this movie came out, that was a legitimate fear. Now, I usually try to be balanced when it comes to understanding certain ideas, especially when they evoke real fears, but I just couldn't do it this time. Simply put, that part of the controversy was just plain stupid. There's no other way to say it. And not just because we now have the benefit of hindsight. I sincerely doubt that anyone who actually raised those kinds of irrational fears actually saw the movie. Because if they did, they missed the larger message it tried to convey, and that message is a lot more relevant now than it was in 2019. Because when you take a step back and look at Arthur's story in conjunction with the world he's living in, then the true impact of this movie takes hold and has nothing to do with incels. In this world that Arthur Fleck lives in, Gotham City is the perfect symbol of a grossly flawed society that pretends those flaws can be fixed by just staying the course. According to the system, you just have to do your job, play by the rules, and take whatever medication helps you feel functional and productive. All those details and messages are there. Even if the movie takes place in the 1980s, the problems still apply every bit as much as they do now. And regardless of whether or not you believe in a functional society, most people are stuck staying the course. They don't even stop to consider that maybe, just maybe, this system is crazy. And anyone who tries to point that out is deemed crazy as well. In the movie, these people are called clowns. It's not subtle, but from the perspective of people like Arthur Fleck, the implication is clear. Gotham City, the society within it, and all the rules that govern it, it's a complete joke. And Arthur Fleck is the only one who seems to get it. And those who don't laugh at it can never hope to see it. Because much like our own world, Gotham City has a small segment of very rich, very powerful people who benefit most from this crazy society. Fittingly enough, the Wayne family is the perfect manifestation of this joke. Even when they carry themselves as responsible, upstanding pillars of the community, they still look down at those who are dissatisfied. They even go so far as to say that their dissatisfaction is the flaw, not the system itself. Arthur Fleck is as caught up as anyone in this decaying society, but then, after a fateful shooting in a subway, he inspires chaos that would make Heath Ledger's Joker proud. That chaos may or not be entirely justified given the circumstances of that incident. But that doesn't ultimately matter, because in a very real sense, the Joker is just an extreme manifestation of something that seemed inevitable. If there was any real controversy with Joker, it's that the wrong issues became controversial. This movie conveys a message to the rich, powerful people who live in ivory towers that things aren't as rosy as they seem. These people who think they have all the answers have no idea what people at the bottom are going through. And just dismissing them as clowns only makes things much worse. We have already seen this happen in the real world to some extent. The powerful who tend to seek greater power call those who lash out as unimportant or misguided. They think those who protest loudly have nothing of merit to say. But that only feels like an excuse not to listen. In that sense, it wasn't too surprising that many media outlets turned on the movie, albeit for the wrong reasons. And trying to link this movie with the incel phenomenon just seemed like the most convenient way to discredit its message. But despite those efforts, the message still resonated when this movie came out, and it still resonates now. Because at its core, Joker highlights how craziness compounds craziness. In a world that's unfair, unjust, and full of lies, how can any sane person not be driven insane by their circumstances? Arthur Fleck had to deal with a lot more circumstances than most, and his mental illness only compounded the situation. But rather than play by the rules, he made a mockery of them. Now, there are times within this movie where it's not entirely clear when the events unfolding are real or vivid delusions. It does nicely reflect the uncertain nature of the Joker's origins. But in the end, Arthur Fleck's story becomes secondary. Because once he becomes the Joker, he becomes something so much more than a mentally ill loner. When I first saw Joker in theaters, I felt like I'd just seen a movie that people are going to be talking about for years to come. And at this point, I think it's safe to say that this movie is aging a whole lot better than most other superhero movies. It's also one of those movies that can be interpreted in so many ways, which is oddly befitting of the Joker's chaotic nature. But at the same time, when I saw this movie, I knew some of those interpretations would be used in the name of pushing an agenda, and not in a good way. Sadly, some of my sentiments turned out to be accurate. There are plenty of grifters, gurus, and trolls who have used the Joker as an avatar for their agenda. And while most are harmless, others can use the Joker to amplify dark, distressing ideas that prey on the vulnerable, not unlike Arthur Fleck himself. And that's really unfortunate, because absent the controversies, Joker is a movie worthy of praise on the same level as The Dark Knight. But because it came out at a time when people were panicking about lonely, deranged men, more so than the society that created them, it just wasn't able to have the same impact. Joker is still an excellent movie, and one that already has a unique place in cinematic history. It gave us a world of tragic, disturbing circumstances. And yet, even in the face of all the chaos it creates, it dared to laugh at it. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.